Hey, Paige, before we get started tonight, could you put the words back up to that last song? Something's changing. Guys, when Jimmy picks these songs, we have some conversation about them, but he really chooses the songs. He and Jacob and Patty really select what talks to them and speaks to them. But I can't think of a more appropriate phrase than what I hope is happening this weekend with you guys. Look what this says. Something's changing in the spirit. Something is breaking. I can feel it. It's like what we wrote on our rock, what we're thinking about in our life is changing. The song before this, we sing about, out of the ashes, our resurrected King. That resurrection, that change, is what gives us the ability to break the things that we feel helpless and hopeless about. So thank you, Jimmy and Jacob and Patty, for singing those songs tonight. I know they really spoke to me, and I hope they spoke to you and put us in an attitude of worship tonight. So here's what we're going to talk about tonight. I want to just give a quick check-in, right? Make sure you got your rock somewhere close on your body. I laughed at somebody today. They said, I lost my rock, and then they realized it was in another pocket. So keep your rock handy, right? Keep hold of that. Keep thinking about this conversation with God. And I know on Friday night we had in your small groups, what does it take to have a good conversation? And I don't know what you guys landed on with answers, but I will tell you this, from my perspective, it takes listening and talking. And so this God of ours, who has this infinite power to do all the great things that He's done in the Bible, and outside the Bible, in our lives, He wants to have a personal and intimate conversation with you. I don't know if you've started that, or if you're thinking about it, or you're well into that conversation. It doesn't matter. God is ready to meet you there. So I want to tell you, when I was asked to talk about God of the impossible, I started to think about all the impossible things in the Bible. Right? And it's funny because I mentioned this to Jeannie after I found out what the topic was going to be. And she started saying, well, you can tell a story about Moses when he split the sea, because that seems something that's pretty what? Impossible. Right? I was like, yeah, that'd be a good one. Or then I was thinking about, hey, in the same story, right, God starts to rain down food from heaven. I thought that would be what? Impossible. That's pretty impossible, right? Or when He floods the earth. And that's pretty what? And when there's pillars of fire, or when Elijah calls down fire that laps up everything around it. And I started to think about every single story in the Bible is a story about God doing the impossible. And yet in our lives, do we think He can do the impossible? Is this something we believe, or is this something we practice? So I thought about all those great, powerful, and unbelievable possibilities that God has done, turning the impossible to possible. But here's what I landed on for the next two talks. We're going to continue to talk about resurrections. Did anybody know there were other resurrections in the Bible other than Jesus? Here's the crazy thing. There are other resurrections that aren't even performed by Jesus. So tonight, we're going to talk about the first story of resurrection in the Bible. And it's actually in the Old Testament. It is a prophet named Elisha, with the S-H-A, right? Elijah and Elisha, it's kind of complicated, but Elisha is who we're going to talk about. And his story is found in 2 Kings. But I want to tell you a little bit about what's going on here with his story. So Elisha is a man of God, a prophet, who travels from town to town to town to spread the word of God, to teach people about God. And so he always walks the same way out of town. And he comes to this first town, and there's a rich lady there who recognizes that Elijah is a man of God. And so what does she want to do with a man of God? She wants to have him into her home and feed him a meal. And so Elijah eats this meal, and this begins to begin a reoccurring pattern in Elijah's life. He leaves this town where he lives, and he walks this way, and he comes to this lady's house. So much so that this lady decides that she goes to her husband, and she says, hey, Elisha always comes here, and we always feed him, so let's do this. Let's make him a room in our house. And so they go to what we would call the attic, and they turn the attic into a place for Elijah to stay. They put a bed in there, they put a chair, they put a dresser, and they create a living space for Elijah. So whenever Elijah walks through the town, where does he stay? This lady convinces her husband to create what we would call a guest bedroom for Elijah. And so this is the pattern that is happening over and over again. Elijah has been to that town. He's now headed south out of that town, and something happens. And that's where we're going to pick up the story. We're going to read in 2 Kings chapter 4, verses 8 through 10. And one day, Elisha went to Shunem, and a well-to-do woman was there. Right? She urged him to stay for a meal. So whenever he came by, he stopped there to eat. She said to her husband, I know this man often comes our way as a holy man of God. Let's make a small room for him on the roof and put in a bed and a table and a chair and a lamp for him. Then he can stay there whenever he comes to us. Now, what I love this story is, right, it's just like it happens in my life. Jeannie gets an idea. She comes and tells me about it. I probably don't think it's that good. And then the next thing, what are we doing? That idea. All right? And so I get the idea that the story, that the wife comes to the man and says, let's build a place on our roof, an attic place for Elisha to stay. And I'm sure the husband said what? We don't need to do that. That's a lot of work, blah, blah, blah. And then the next thing, what's he doing? He's building the room. So about 6 years ago, Jeannie and I are sitting in our living room, pretty much minding our own business, when there's a knock at our door. And I look at Jeannie and I think, it's like 8:30 on a Wednesday or something, or whatever, Thursday or whatever night it was. I'm like, who is knocking on our door? We go to the door, and we find a frightened and hopeless and helpless young lady needing a place to stay for the night. And so we invite her in. And we begin to do what we know how to do. And that's have a conversation with God. And we begin to pray about her situation and about what's happening in her life. And it's not too long after that Jeannie's asking me to what? Turn the attic into a place where she can stay. And I did what I only knew how to do, and that is to continue to have a conversation with God. Now we find Elisha, right? We find Elisha venturing south of the lady's home, right? She's provided him this wonderful hospitality, but now he's moved on to the next town. When he's in the next town, something crazy happens. The well-to-do lady runs up to him, and she says, "My son is ill, and I need your help." And Elisha's more around my age, and so the thought of running from where he is all the way back to her town is probably what? It's a little impossible. Exactly. So what does Elisha do?
Run to the last town.
He says this. He says, "I'm going to give my staff to my servant. I'm going to tell my servant and the lady to what? Go ahead of me, and I will what? Catch up." So really what Elisha says is, I'm too old to run that fast back to your home, but here's my staff that carries the power of God, and I want you to go back there. And so we pick that story up in verse 31. And here's Elisha's servant. His name is Gehazi. I love that name. It's a great name. You should think about that for your children. But Gehazi arrived first, and he laid the staff across the boy's face, but there was no sound, no sign of life. Gehazi went back to meet Elisha and said, "The boy hasn't stirred." Verse 32. Elisha entered the house and found the boy stretched out on the bed, dead. He went into the room and he locked the door, just the two of them in the room, and prayed to God. He then got onto the bed with the boy and covered him with his body, mouth to mouth, awkward, eyes to eyes, hands to hands, and as he was stretched out over him like that, the boy's body became warm. Elisha got up and paced back and forth in the room. Then he went back and he stretched himself upon the boy again. The boy started sneezing. He sneezed 7 times and then he opened his eyes. So I was going to ask Jimmy to help me demonstrate that tonight, but he said no. So this is odd, right? It's a little weird, but what happens to the boys, guys? What happens to the boy? He's resurrected. But you notice what happens with Elisha. How does Elisha perform this miracle? Yes. Look what he does. Right? When he gets into the room with the boy, he shuts the door, and what's the first thing he does? He prays to God. Are you beginning to see the pattern there? What's Elisha do? He has a conversation with the God of the impossible. How's your conversation with God going this weekend? Have you locked yourself in a room and prayed to Him? Have you given yourself an opportunity to be in conversation with Jesus? See, Elisha doesn't perform the miracle himself. He's only what I would call the conduit of that miracle. Right? God does the miracle, but He does it through speaking with Elisha in prayer. fairly simple. Well, that girl that knocked on our door, I didn't really know what to do. And once again, Jeannie, of course, being much more faithful than I, said what? Let's just pray and see where God leads us. And so, we prayed. We prayed with her. We prayed with each other. I prayed a lot on my own because I didn't know what to do. An 18-year-old girl.
Because it's a girl.
It's an 18-year-old girl in a house full of boys. And girls are different. Joey told me their anatomy was different this weekend. I didn't even know. I tried to Google it, but I didn't have service. All right, so, right? And so, I didn't know what to do. And so, when I didn't know what to do, I prayed to God, the God of the impossible. I didn't know how to do this. And we had conversations all the time, and we prayed together, but mostly we just loved her. And that girl, right, we now call her our daughter. And it's Brittany, if you don't know her. And she's been not living with us now because she's married, but she's now been with us for 6 years. Because she what? She knocked on our door, needing a resurrection in her life. She was helpless and hopeless about where she was in her life. Her rock was really heavy. Jeannie and I didn't resurrect her. All we did was have a conversation with her and God. God's in charge of doing the resurrecting. You hear that? God's in charge of doing the resurrection. That's not on us. What is on us is to be in conversation with Him. It's not easy to talk about what's on your rock. It wasn't easy to talk about Brittany, what was going on in her life. There were lots of tears, lots of grilled cheese sandwiches, because that's all I know how to do when somebody's hurting is make them a grilled cheese sandwich. Lots of late nights, lots of tears. But in that came what? Her rock was able to be resurrected. So I don't know where you are tonight, but I do know this, that the leaders that are in this room did not come here for the wonderful accommodations and the very comfortable mattresses, even though mine is extremely comfortable.
Yes.
Right? They didn't come here for the interesting way to cook hamburgers tonight. Right? They didn't, even though I love walking tacos, I didn't show up because there was going to be what? Do you know why they're here? They're here because they want to be in a conversation with you about what you need to have a conversation with Jesus about. They give up their time and their weekend just for this very moment to help you have a conversation with our Lord. So I'm going to ask the leaders now to kind of get up and find a corner of this space or a place to spread out. And what I'd like you guys to do is Jimmy play some music, and as we're in an attitude of prayer, I'm going to close this with prayer. And when we finish that, if you feel led to talk to a leader tonight about what's on your rock, or about what needs to be on your rock, or about what you need to have a conversation with Jesus about, I want you to do that. We'll have time in this space for everyone to get a chance to talk and start that conversation. All right, let's close in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for bringing us here tonight, for caring enough about us to want to be in conversation with you, for loving us despite what we think is impossible in our lives, for caring enough about us to help us through the helpless and hopeless times. We ask that tonight that we feel your presence, that you help us be resurrected from whatever is on this rock, whatever we're carrying around that is too heavy, too hard, too challenging to talk about. We ask that you help us to open up, because we feel a change in the Spirit. Something is breaking free tonight. We feel a change in the Spirit. Something is breaking free in us tonight. It's in your holy name we pray.